Now for our roundtable with our News Channel 5 political analyst, Mariana Mancuso and Brian Crowley. And Brian, we'll begin with you. You heard the conversation from the mayor and Dr. Wagner, 14 months after the onset of COVID, George Floyd, a highly contested election. Your reflections on this day as we head into the traditional start to summer for America. And as I said at the outset, and thank you for your service, Brian, to the U.S. military as we remember those who gave their lives while serving for the military in this country.
Well, I agreed a lot with what Dr. Wagner and the mayor had to say. We've had a period of for quite some time now where people can't even basically agree on what time of day it is. We really need to get back to more civil discourse. We need to get back to more civil discourse among our leaders in Congress and all through Washington and the state legislators and in Tallahassee. We can't continue with this kind of vitriolic hatred for each other and succeed as a nation. Ultimately, it will tear us apart.
Mariana, among the many hats you wear, you teach, you get to meet people in all walks of life. Let's take the optimistic view for a moment. You heard what everybody said, you heard what Brian said. How do we get there? What do you say to people? How do we get there? And then your realistic take on whether we can get there.
I like how you're assuming that my realistic and optimistic take don't intersect.
Hope springs eternal.
Absolutely. I think that, the people that I've talked to, one of the biggest ways that we can get to that ability of having civil discourse is just that, meeting other people who have differing points of view, differing types of life experiences, and having those conversations and being able to talk about facts and truth. And oftentimes people are just throwing out their opinion without being able to support it. And until we can get to a point where we can actually have a conversation with those who may disagree us based on truth and facts, then it's going to be extremely difficult. However, I will say that I am optimistic because when I talk to my students and we have conversations, they're very global thinking and they think about how does this impact other people? And that is something that has given me a lot of hope during the tumultuous 4 years of the Trump administration and even going into the hyper-partisan times of the pandemic. Just having those conversations and seeing the things that they're doing and how they are very global thinking and how what they do affects other people in society.
And Brian, you talk often to me on camera and off that we sometimes, we're not necessarily the students of history we should be. We've had plenty of turbulent times, to say the very least, in this nation's history. We come through them. Are we too pessimistic to assume, much like the question I put to Mariana, that this too will be something that we will rally around some shared conversation, not necessarily agreement, but shared conversation where we can all move forward? Your thoughts, you're the historian.
Well, I agree with Mayor James on the idea of being optimistic that we will get past these very turbulent times. And certainly in my lifetime, we've had a number of turbulent periods, and we have gotten past it. In fact, the entire history of our country has been turbulent times. People forget the Civil War wasn't that long after the Revolution. The McCarthy era, the Watergate era, the Civil Rights era, which caused a great deal of consternation in the country. We've been through these things. What I always reflect on is that we have these explosive periods of time, but the trend line, I feel like it always tends to go in the right direction. And I think we will this time, but sitting here today, it's sometimes hard to imagine us moving forward.
Mariana, just a brief take before we go to break on the Florida political conversation. We'll take a little bit of a breather moving into summer, but already candidates lining up in the gubernatorial race, Senate races, and the like. Your thoughts?
Florida is already shaping up to be quite the battleground for 2022. And again, I think I've said this last week and previous weeks, and I'll continue to say it. I can't even believe we're talking about the midterms, and it's going to be a very busy election season here in the Sunshine State. Nevertheless, it's still important to get registered to vote and to show up to vote, most importantly.
Brian, you've always have an ear to the ground for the political conversation throughout your career. What are you hearing as we take a brief breather, but look to the Florida political landscape as we're going to start moving forward and revving up?
Well, one thing is that a lot of the folks who are looking at the 2022 race are really looking at the 2024 race. We're going to have a fascinating election year in 2022. You've got Charlie Crist running against Ron DeSantis, assuming Charlie gets the Democratic nomination. Val Demings brings a whole new dynamic to politics in Florida as she looks at running against Marco Rubio for the U.S. Senate. There's a lot of other races up and down the ballot in Florida. And in addition to all that, we should keep in mind that in 2022, we're going to have redistricting, and that will have a gigantic impact on the state for the next 10 years.
Brian, Mariana, we'll have your closing thoughts in just a moment. Thank you, as always, both of you, for being with us, and we'll be back in just a moment.